So it was great. But that war inside the family, Luigi Oliveri kind of overstepped his bounds. He got made. There's a whole story behind that a lot of guys didn't acknowledge. The way he had gotten made was not with the old ways. So a lot of guys didn't want to acknowledge him. So he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder. Got himself into a predicament where they were going to whack him out. And then Charlie, over dinner one night, said to me, he shared with me, they're going to kill Luigi. And another guy at the time. And then I was like, I can't believe you're going to kill somebody that you've known your whole life. Like, he grew up in this. He just got made. And he goes, no, that's it. And I told him, you would do it. You'll kill him.
The legends of America's mobs are woven into the fabric of society and pop culture. We've all seen the movies or heard the tales of these criminal organizations. Their stories of power, wealth, respect, family, greed, betrayal, violence, murder, and mayhem. While the golden age of the mobs may be over, organized crime continues to thrive, and the stories remain as infamous as ever. You're listening to the Gangland History Podcast, hosted by mob historian Jacob Stoops. He tells the true crime biographies of real-life mobsters and dives deep into the plots, subplots, and real facts behind organized crime in America. Viewer discretion is advised.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Gangland History Podcast. I'm your host, mob historian Jacob Stoops. We've got a very special episode today in which we interview the man who infiltrated the dangerous world of the Mafia and lived to tell the tale. Today's guest, Giovanni Rocco, is a former deep cover agent for the FBI and other law enforcement agencies and is responsible for taking down the American mob organization commonly referred to by the media as the Real Sopranos. During Operation Charlie Horse, Giovanni infiltrated the DeCavalcante Crime Family based in New Jersey and personally gathered enough evidence to prosecute and convict several high-ranking members and associates of the crime family. This action, while bolstering his legend in the undercover world, ultimately led to early retirement and the relocation of his family. During his decades-long career as an undercover for the federal government, he successfully infiltrated outlaw motorcycle gangs, domestic and international terror organizations, and the Mafia. Drawing from his service in law enforcement in various positions, Giovanni now shares his expertise with law enforcement, military, and intelligence units worldwide. Most recently, he's become the host of the show Inside the Life, along with co-host Dutch McAlpin, produced by the Mob Museum, where they give listeners a one-of-a-kind look into the inner world of organized crime, featuring guests who have lived on both sides of the law. In addition to his work as a subject matter expert and the host of a successful YouTube show, Giovanni is also an author. He released his autobiography entitled Giovanni's Ring, My Life Inside the Real Sopranos in February of 2021. I'll go ahead and leave a link in the description of the episode, and if you'd like, you can get a signed copy from Giovanni himself. Definitely a must-have book for your mob collection. Giovanni's experiences have been featured in the Washington Times, the New York Post, and more. This is his story in his own words. Hey, Giovanni, welcome to the Gangland History Podcast. How are you doing today?
Good, Jacob.
I just want to say, for a little bit of behind-the-scenes stuff for my audience, Giovanni was kind enough to take some time out of Labor Day. I know that this interview will be posted certainly afterwards, after it's gone through editing. But Giovanni was kind enough to take some time out of Labor Day to jump on and do a little mob talk and tell his story with my listeners. So Giovanni, I really appreciate that. I know that as a family man, sometimes you just got to take the time that you have available, and that meant Labor Day recording for both of us. And I'm just happy to have you on.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks for having me.
So why don't we just jump right into it? We'll just get right into it. No pomp and circumstance. Can you just tell me what it was like growing up in Bayonne, New Jersey?
It was awesome. I mean, a little bit of good, a little bit of bad. I describe it as very Brooklyn-esque. It's the best way I can use it to describe. It's just to put everybody in old school Brooklyn. Family was everything, no matter what culture you came from, and all the cultures melded together. It was a great, at times we clashed because of the times. I grew up very young in the 70s and into the 80s. A lot of leftover mob stuff during the 80s, very heavy presence of Mafia. The docks were there, right? So you had a little bit of that. Where I'm from in my neighborhood is Chuck Webner, was the inspiration for Rocky. So this city had so many different things going on. It had On the Waterfront with Marlon Brando's movie. It was influenced by that neighborhood and those docks that we grew up on. So it was all, it was an experience. And just growing up there was a blessing because the families really, truly looked out for each other. No matter what you did, the streets went on, street lights went on at night. And if you weren't home, you could be 5 blocks, 10 blocks away the other side of town. Somebody's asking you, shouldn't you be home by now? That's the kind of people slept with their doors open. I remember as a young kid, just the old fruit trucks with the old Italian guys coming around, with the old pickup trucks and selling fruit on weekends. And it was awesome.
Yeah, and with the Chuck Wepner as a background and On the Waterfront from a movie standpoint, it just says tough. Everybody there, blue collar, tough. You don't get much tougher than Chuck Wepner, who, as you said, was the inspiration for Rocky, which, gosh, if you're a boxing fan, there's even a little bit of mob stuff in the early Rockies, but the thing you think about is just pure toughness.
Yeah.
Do you remember who in your neighborhood, you kind of said it was a bit of a melting pot, who the mob guys were? Was it DeCavalcante guys? Was it other families, Genovese, or just a melting pot of street guys and just regular civilians?
So growing up, Jacob, I knew it to be a stronghold for the Genovese family, right? There was a Gambino influence, but it wasn't until much further in my life I realized how many different families had an influence in town. Bayonne's a very small town, but it had different sections to it. So where my neighborhood was very strong with Genovese. I had a lot of Capos living in my neighborhood, a lot of soldiers living in my neighborhood. So I was aware of that coming up. But it wasn't until much later when I realized how many Colombos, not so many Bonanos. That was much later in my life. But I would say Gambino, Genovese, and Colombo. And then the DeCavs had a little bit of an influence too. Again, that close proximity to being right outside of Manhattan, having close proximity to Hoboken, to Tino Fumara and his crew in the Genovese family. John DiGilio, he lived in my neighborhood. I played in his backyard, grew up in his element, and he was a strong influence on me in the street and how to behave and how to carry myself.
And if you don't mind me asking, why do you feel like there were just so many different families in your area? Was it the proximity to New York?
Yeah, it was definitely the proximity to New York, the proximity all throughout New Jersey, right? The stronghold of, I guess because rewind to the 30s, right? When everybody came into Ellis Island, Jersey City was a stone's throw away. So everybody that came off the boats in Ellis Island, they kind of stayed right there. If they didn't branch off and go to New England or other places, maybe some went outside into New York. But a lot of people stayed in Jersey. That's where most of the roots come from.
So back to you. Everybody growing up has defining events or things that influence the character of what you become as you grow up, and they shape you and they mold you. What were those things for you?
So I was like a chameleon. Different things shaped and molded me. It depends on what kind of mood I was in, how I was doing in school at the time. I had all these different influences in my life, good, bad, and ugly. I had an influence from the streets of Bayonne. My father and mother tried to keep me out of the streets. I was the black sheep of the family. Out of the three of us growing up, I had two brothers, one younger brother born very late in my life. But for the most part, it was my brother and my sister. They were A+ students. I was always the failing student, summer school, really, really bad attitude. I didn't get along with my parents very well because I acted out a lot in school. My mother tried to send us to private school, to Catholic school when we were younger. By the age, I think, 4th grade, I was pretty much getting thrown out of there, if not by the age of kindergarten. I think I got my first suspension or detention in kindergarten from what I'd known. So
that's pretty hard to do.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to do. But in my life, it was pretty easy. Not my proudest moment, but, to be raw and honest. But it all contributed to who I became later in life. My My mom's side of the family had some influence into the outlaw biker culture, so I grew up in that, having some weddings. One particular wedding I write about in my book was, we didn't have a lot of money as kids, and my parents were very young when they got married, and they were born and raised in low-income housing. So we actually had a wedding, a reception for my aunt who married into a biker club in the projects, into low-income housing. So that was ended horribly, violently. Violent fist fights, people pulling out knives. It was crazy. So I grew up in that kind of environment. My dad was a cop during all of this. I'm third generation police. So I had this melting pot of chaos and what I was trying to figure out is normality in my life. But again, my relationship with my parents and my relationship in school, it kind of pulled me away from being a good kid. I acted out. Anytime I had the chance to be in the street and fight, I was in the street and fighting. That drew me towards the criminal element in my neighborhoods, the bad boys, if you would. But I always had the burning desire to want to be law enforcement. I saw my dad make an arrest a few times, but one specific incident, we were leaving a movie in Jersey City, and I watched him collar up a guy, arrest a guy. And that was the defining moment where I said, yeah, this is what I want to do. But again, being a failing student and being a kid that was told you'll be nothing, you're dead or in jail by 25 is what I was told. Right. So if you grow up with that planted seed in your head, well, if I'm going to be dead or in jail by 25, I might as well live hard and fast now. So I just gravitated to the streets. In doing that, I was just exposed to a lot more things. My father would try to keep me out of the streets. So he'd bring home pictures of autopsy photos, crime scenes. I knew all the ins and outs of who was getting whacked, in the mob. When John DiGilio met his demise by his own guys in the family, I still have his autopsy photos. My dad brought them home for me, showed me those things, gave me them as little souvenirs. So just to say, like, this is what you're going to wind up like. I think in his own way, he was looking out for me, trying to keep me out of the streets. But it just drew me there more and more.
Yeah, I was going to ask, what does that, as a young and impressionable person, experiencing the violence firsthand. I'm not from anything like that, so I don't have any context of what that might be like and how that would affect you growing up. And then, of course, your father on the other side bringing home autopsy photos and showing you this is what it's really like. How do you feel like that influenced you? And I guess my question is, your siblings were kind of more straight arrows. What do you feel like it was about you that made you kind of go in that opposite direction?
Well, it was definitely my defiance of authority with my father. I write about that in the book because it's a defining moment as a cop's kid. And I guess I wanted to share those moments as there's so many first responders that maybe try to do the same thing as my father did with me. He often said, I'm not raising 3 daughters. I'm raising 2 sons and 1 daughter. So I'm raising men. I'm not raising all women. And he was a tough guy. My dad still is to this day a very tough guy. And I often describe and it's easy, if Robert De Niro and Al Pacino were to have a baby together, that's my father. And truly is, right? And pick any different movie, good, bad, and ugly. But that was him. But with my defiance to authority with my relationship with him and my willingness to just do everything I can to get under his skin, looking back now as a grown man with my own kids, I think, I had so much untreated trauma from the trauma I was living in, and he was bringing home so much trauma. Now that I know about trauma and how to mitigate it and identify it as a much older man, looking back, I can swallow it and digest it a little bit easier, and I'm more forgiving about it because they didn't have that back then. They didn't have the resources they have now. So back then it was just, look, you had all this trauma, you brought it home, you transferred it onto your family, or you just drank. Right? You just drank it to oblivion and then you just got it out in some violent kind of way. And that was taught to me at a young age. So that lashing out was it's in my DNA. I had that ability to snap on a dime and just, turn ugly in a second because that was my survival mechanism. Even though I was a skinny kid in the street, and I brought that to the street. I brought my attitude, my anti-authority, but I also brought my father's authority to the street because having a father who would always get me out of trouble because he's a cop, I always had that little bit of extra. I pushed it that extra, maybe a extra yard or 5 yards, getting a little more distance that I could out of it. So yeah, that's what I did throughout my whole life.
And that's probably the thing that I can relate with. haven't necessarily shared it on this podcast, shared it in other places, but I've grown up myself with a certain amount of trauma stemming from abuse, and it was a different time. I think parents had different acceptable means of punishing kids, and so you're right, that gets transferred to you. And I'm 42, and there are times where I still have that chip on my shoulder, and it comes out in the most unexpected ways, sometimes, not in the sense of a temper or anything of that nature, but you see something on TV, or you see your kid crying or something of that nature. It like just triggers that childhood memory that you have, and almost for me has at times made me kind of sick to my stomach, thinking back on some of the different abuses I went through as a young adult. But that's neither here nor there. So you've said before, and I think you just said it, I was not supposed to be a cop. You were the black sheep of your family. How did you end up becoming a cop?
So I graduated high school by the skin of my teeth. That's a whole nother story, but I graduated by the skin of my teeth, and I got lucky cutting out of school, and I cut out of school one day, and I actually, in order to cut out of school and go hang out in New York, I took a test for New Jersey Bell Phone Company. And New Jersey Bell was given a job fair type of thing. They came in and gave a competency test to see what you were able to do. I took the test. And again, I was always a bad test taker because I never applied myself. But looking back, everybody was saying to me, you can be worth more. You are worth more. Invest in yourself. I didn't know what they meant back then. I took this test as fast as I could. And I just got out, and I took the rest of the day, and I cut out of school and I went to New York. A couple of weeks later, they called me and they offered me a job. So again, I didn't take my SATs. I had no plans for college. I had no plans for a vocational school or anything like that. I was in auto mechanics in high school, and that's pretty much what I was going to do. Become a truck driver or do something labor-wise. And so they called me up and they offered me a job in a phone company, and I took that job. And I was making great money in 1980, 88, 89, whichever year it was I graduated. And for a year and a half, I made fantastic money. And then my father gave me a call and said, look, they're giving a test in Hudson County for one of the cop jobs. You should take it. And I'm thinking, well, I'm never going to pass it. I don't do well on tests. So I gave it a shot. And unfortunately, I fell just shy of the hiring. They were hiring 10, and they made an 11 spot for me, which I was lucky. A little bit of nepotism in there. It's the Jersey way. But it happened a lot because, in our area that happened. People wanted the next generation, right? They wanted that third generation cop. They wanted to keep the family name going because if you had good DNA and you had good cops, you drew from them. So they kind of, they invested in me and they gave me a shot, and I loved it, right? From the minute I can remember the day I took my oath and held my hand on that Bible like it was yesterday. It's almost 30-something years ago now, but, I loved every minute of the job it offered me. And I was able to draw from so much of that experience I had as a kid into the job and into the patrol that I was in, into the detective bureau, narcotics, and working my way into working undercover.
So you brought up the oath, and I feel like anytime you take an oath, it can be a pretty solemn thing, depending on how much you truly believe in it. So tell me about the day that you took that oath and kind of what it meant to you even 30, 40 years later.
Sure. That oath is everything, Jacob. Everything. Any first responder will tell you that. You get chills just talking about it. You get teary-eyed. I mean, that's the difference between you when you hear the national anthem play and you get your veterans and military or even your family or such, you get that bubbling in your stomach and the butterflies and you get the tears welling in your eyes. That's the same feeling you think about when you took that oath. Like it was yesterday. What the room smelled like, who was in there. I can remember every detail, every little detail there was, because it meant that much to me. So the fact that I was being given this opportunity, the fact that I was threatened, do not blow this opportunity, it's a gift horse that was given to me. So I took it, and it means everything to me. I worked a very short period of time in my police uniform in patrol, but I often say, listen, I will not be laid to rest in it because it probably doesn't fit me, but it will be with me when I'm laid to rest. That badge will be with me, and that's how much it means to me. So I still have it hanging here to this day, I have everything I worked for in this career, all of my ticket books I ever wrote. I never wrote many because I wasn't that type of person. I felt two-faced. I gave a lot of people breaks because I was the kid that needed a break growing up. So instead of giving tickets out, and believe it or not, there are quotas in the police. Everybody says there's no quotas. There's quotas. You know, you have to write so many tickets a month, or they threaten to put you out walking. So I used to just tell them, listen, put me out. I had a little bit of defiance of authority in me still. So I would say, look, I'm not writing a ticket. So just put me out walking. I'll walk a post. And even that was such a great experience looking back. Spinning a wooden nightstick, walking midnights, you know, along the main drag in town, in the city. So every little bit is just something that constitutes the reason why I took that oath.
So, and that's amazing. And I can't think of a single job that I've had where I would have kept anything. So I feel like that just speaks to just, well, one, the solemnness of your oath and how seriously you took it, and two, the impact that it's had on you throughout your life, so much so that you just want to take it with you into the afterlife, which is, I hadn't even thought of anything like that. That's wow. Very, very impactful, very impactful. So can you tell us a little bit about your early career in law enforcement and how you kind of gained that early experience?
Yeah, what I had to gain first was respect. I didn't have the respect. I was treated, again, you're working with my grandfather's generation were Korean War vets. They were pretty much transitioned out. A lot of the guys that worked with my father were Vietnam veterans. So you were going into a group of guys and trying to join a brotherhood that was very tight. And an outsider like me, even though I was my father's son and I had that bona fides, they didn't let me off easy. I remember showing up and the one guy used to chase me all over cities and towns and trying to arrest me or trying to get me in trouble because I was just a thorn in his side. And I'll never forget when I showed up and he gave me my locker and I walked in there in the first shift that we worked together, he literally grabbed me by the collar, pushed me up against the locker and called me a piece of, I'll say it nice, you're a piece of garbage, you don't belong here, you know, that kind of thing. They really made me work for my respect. And my father also reminded me, listen, you got this job because I helped you, but you got it on your own. If you screw this up, it's on you. If I find out you laid a hand on somebody that was handcuffed or you used force that wasn't necessary, you will pay for it. Do not embarrass yourself and don't embarrass the family. And it was always instilled in me as a kid. Treat people the way you want to be treated. And I carried that through my career. And that was a game changer for me in my career. I realized it later on because of the way my father raised me. And the fact that I had empathy and sympathy for people. Then because I was a street kid, now I'm dealing with people in the street that are suffering and could have been me. Anybody I dealt with and I put handcuffs on, it could have easily have been me. Instead of growing up as a cop, I could have been a criminal. But, you know, somebody was looking out for me upstairs, I guess. So patrol was very easy for me. I love patrol. I love being in pursuits. You're talking in the height of the, you know, early 90s when all those movies were made about the carjackings in Newark and the pursuits every night. That's the world I was living in patrol. Every single night we had pursuits, car pursuits, stolen car pursuits, foot pursuits. I mean, we worked in an area that was just, Hudson County, New Jersey was just a melting pot of criminals, right? The streets were alive, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff coming in from New York. So I just had all these opportunities given to me. I was an active cop. A lot of older guys like to sleep on midnights, you know, so here my partner and I were very aggressive and we're calling in car chases at 2:30 in the morning. The older guys didn't appreciate it, but, you know, it's just cops being cops. And then I was given the opportunity to work in plain clothes. And I had my detective shield very, very early in my career. I earned my detective shield. So on my own merit, you know, just because of the amount of arrests I was making, the status of the collars that I was making, you know, I was making good arrests, drug arrests, a lot of murders. I was getting clearing a lot of homicides and stuff. So they gave me the opportunity working with the Gold Shield.
So was it before you became a detective or kind of during this early part when you're working in some of the more violent areas, the combat zones, the two-man areas, which if you could explain what exactly the two-man area means for people that don't know, as well as bona fides. You said bona fides earlier for people that don't know what that is as well.
Yeah, bona fides is like street cred, right? Like, you know, I always explain it as sprinkle a little seasoning on something to make it digest a little bit easier. You know, I'll get into examples later when I started working undercover with how I was bona fides. But you had referred to the two-man areas. That was in my phone company days. See, I had such an addiction for adrenaline when I was in the phone company, I wasn't just a regular telephone repair guy. I found out they would pay me more money to work late hours after 5 p.m. when the sun goes down and all the criminals come out. I worked in Jersey City, I worked in Newark, and really violent areas. So once the sun goes down, all the gangbangers came out and all the dope dealers came out, drugs and guns and shootings every night. You have to go into these areas, and I give it to the phone people, because phone and cable guys, they don't get to carry guns. You don't get to carry, you get in trouble carrying weapons. And you have to go into these areas, into these homes. These homes were considered two-man areas. They would not send you in by yourself. You had to take another repair guy with you. It seems silly, but I guess there's safety in numbers kind of thing. And I saw the craziest stuff. On top of what my dad had given me as a kid, I had been, I walked into the crime scenes. I walked into drug dens. I walked into guys bagging dope up. I walked into guns all over the place. I was fixing one night. I was fixing the phone, and I'm crouched down behind somebody's couch in a low-income area. And next thing you know, the kid comes running in with the front of his shin blown out, and he had been shot in the leg. So it's all these things that happened to me. Wrong place. I was always in the wrong place at the wrong time, Jacob. But it always happened to be that it paid dividends later on. But those two-man areas, I was drawn to that. Most people would go, no, that's not me. Some guy from Texas who was a transfer, and he took me under his wing, and his guy named Gary. And he took me under his wing, and he was like, look, we'll work these two-man areas. I made this much money last year. Crazy amounts of money back in 1989, 90. This guy was making $90,000 a year. That was unheard of back then, So I had the opportunity to make this kind of money. I took a cut and pay to become a cop. I could have been retired early with a good pension if I was still in the phone company, but again, it was my addiction to adrenaline that I had. So those two-man areas were a blessing to me. The different mob areas I went into, and the guys checking me, when I was climbing up the pole, wanting me to come down and see my work orders. So a lot of communication skills I learned back then. A lot of drug dealers, armed drug dealers telling me, look, and again, I was like a beanpole. I was a skinny kid. I was 19, 18 years old. And these guys are saying, look, I'll give you $3,000. You hook up a Fugazi line, a hot line, just hook a line up to my phone, and I'll pay you $3,000 a month. And these guys have guns on them. You got to negotiate your way out of it. And if you tell these guys no, you got to come back the next day, and they're just going to keep haunting you. So you had to ingratiate yourself everywhere you went. And I didn't realize it was really preparing me to be an undercover late in my career.
You feel like because of the way that you grew up, or maybe your age, you were too young to know any better? Or were there ever any times where you were scared at that point in time? Or is it a situation where now that you look back, you're like, oh, that was kind of a scary, maybe even a messed up situation? Were there any moments where your fear took over the adrenaline?
Yes. My fear, great question, Jacob. My fear kept me alive. As a phone repair guy, all the way to the end of my career as an undercover FBI operative. Fear is what keeps you alive. If you don't have fear, and we talk about it a lot, if you don't have fear and your heart's not pounding out of your chest, you don't have that feeling like that tunnel vision, your ears get red and you start hearing that buzz, and the room starts to close in on you. That's what it felt. All right. But that's adrenaline. That can keep me alive. It kept me sharp, what I thought was sharp. But I took those skills, and yes, I would go home from the phone company, and I go home as an undercover cop early in my career and go, what the hell? Why didn't I just walk away? Why didn't I just get in the phone truck and just leave? Why did I have to say something extra? Why did I have to insert myself into this thing? Because it's just in my DNA. It was in my makeup. I needed to be involved. I was always the cheerleader for the good guys. Stand up from the bad guys. Stand up to them. It's not that I was a drama king. I didn't want to insert myself in everything. I just found myself in these messes all the time. And again, I guess growing up, the violence that I saw, the things that I saw happen, the things I witnessed, and the guys I grew up around, again, I grew up, my friends' mothers were being murdered. My friends' dads were in jail. Guys that worked with my father had been committing homicides, cops, and I saw the good, bad, and the ugly of everything in life, not just the gangsters. The gangsters in my life were some guys that I looked up to, that I went to for safety and advice at times. They gave good advice at times to me. It just depends on the situation I was in. But I always had that fear, right? Because again, that fear is a good thing. It'll keep you alive.
I want to get to your undercover work, but what you sparked a question, and it's been a pretty healthy debate over the course of my podcast. You hear it on other podcasts. The neighborhoods. People say all the time that 70s, 80s, when the mob was in control, the neighborhoods were safer than they are today. What's your opinion?
So the mob guys, I agree with it to an extent, okay? It's a tough sell, right? But growing up and seeing what I saw, if the cops, you better hope the cops could take care of it, right? I'll give you an example here of the most extreme. If there was somebody going around in our neighborhood and God forbid somebody tried to lure a kid into a car, or God forbid you were embarrassing the neighborhood or you're misrepresenting yourself, it was dealt with swiftly, right? And if it wasn't dealt with by the cops swiftly, when these gangsters or mobsters lived in our neighborhood, that's their home. That's where they come home to. That's the safety. They decided to raise their family in these neighborhoods. So everybody will act accordingly, and it didn't matter what race you were, what religion you were, what creed. We all had to get along, right? And if you can't get along and you're an outsider, it's time for you to find a new neighborhood and move, but everybody got along. It was those, and again, you didn't see the violence you see today at the young age. If somebody was screwing up, they were dealt with swiftly and harshly. Other times, maybe they were just told they need to find a new place to move. But Bayonne was a sanctuary city, and the sanctuary was our neighborhood, and we looked out for each other. That was our neighborhood sanctuary. Do not come in and mess with us. That was across the board, good, bad, and ugly.
So, Giovanni, at what point did you know that you were destined to do undercover work?
So it was in my younger years, I had watched early movies like Serpico. And it's funny because I do talk to Jack Garcia a lot about that. And it was an influence from him as well. I think that was the defining moment when I knew I wanted to be an undercover. The fact that I can infiltrate some group or an organization and do this cool work. I could actually, for me, it was a little bit different, Jacob, because I could be the guy I was in the phone company. I could be the guy with the scruffy beard again. I could have my earrings again, all the stuff that they took away from me when I became a cop. I could have all that back, So that was an appeal for me. But it was also, like I said, to infiltrate people. I felt like there was a calling. I had that burning flame in my belly I could feel when I knew I wanted to be a policeman. But I had an even stronger draw to want to do undercover work. And I thought, I can do that and I can do it well. And then when I learned about the art of deception, that's what they consider it. A lot of people say you're a liar. You're just tricking people. You're just, deceiving people. You're not deceiving people. It's the art of deception. And the art of deception is much different in the way that you really have to know your legend at the level that I worked towards half of my career, the second half of my career. You really had to, let alone your own identity and being the person that you are is hard enough. Now I had 3 other identities on top of it, different social security numbers, different dates of birth. Now you really, you truly had to be an artist when it came to that work.
And I feel like I've heard other undercovers say, and I guess it's similar to life. When you tell a lie, you find that you're constantly chasing it, and eventually it's gonna come back to haunt you. So as an undercover, I've heard people say there has to be an element of truth to it. So what would you say about that? What are the characteristics of a good undercover?
Yeah, I mean, tradecraft is everything. Characteristics are, I had an older guy once teach me, he was a mentor to me, when I finally started getting training for undercover work in covert operations. And he once told me, you can't F up you, right? Not to use, I don't want to use the harsh language on your show. You can't F up you. And I was like, what does that mean? I was, years before this, I was trying to change my name. I would change my name to Mike. And I had all these different identities that I would create, driver's license. And it was so stupid to do those things because you're so used to your name being Giovanni. Giovanni's Italian for John. People call me Johnny. They call me Johnny Irish. They call me John growing up. So I had all these different names. If you call me any of those, my head's going to turn around. You walk in a room and yell, Mike, there's a good chance I'm not going to turn around, So those little things like that, where my tradecraft really, I can give you an example of, I had so many different names. Johnny Irish is one they called me. because they used to bust my chops. They call me Johnny, they call me G, they call me J, they call me all these different things. And we were on a wiretap one time. We were doing some work with a Dominican drug gang. And the guys were talking on the phone, and we were overhearing them. Now, it was me and two other undercovers that were meeting with them. But they were arguing with each other. Well, they're showing up with 5 guys, 6 guys to this meeting on Friday. They're coming to this meeting. They got all these guys. And they're like, what are you talking about? And they said, well, they got this guy, John, G, and all these people coming with them. And the guy had to explain, no, that's that one. And he's like, no, that's that crazy guy, the one guy, that Giovanni, that's him, you know? So it kind of helped in a way, right? Because I didn't have to make up a name. I mean, I could have a nickname. And then when you say to me, I can know you for 2 years and you know me as John or Johnny. And then when you ask me, who's Giovanni? Well, that's my birth name. That's my name from the old country. That's the name my mother gave me when I was born. Meanwhile, you're trying to look me up under, you know, and it's, again, I'm not giving up tradecraft. This is an old time, you know, these are tricks of the trade from years and years ago and decades. But these are the things that you really truly become, that's when you become a professional, when you can do those things and you realize that your craft is you play chess with human beings, including yourself, right? And the ultimate game is to keep yourself alive. You know, you're the king you're trying to protect in the chess game, but you don't want, because if you get killed, you're done. Your game's over. I don't want my game to end. So you did everything you could. All my tradecraft, everything I gave to what I came to learn about undercover work, I went above and beyond. I went like down rabbit holes. If you taught me something finally and I learned something, I would go down rabbit holes about it. We talked later, you know, earlier about fear. I drew on how do I control my fear? How do I control my heart rate? You know, that's when I started investigating box breathing. Mid to midnight, I was doing box breathing and trying to do mindfulness and meditation because it helped me take control of my own nervous system. And when I can control my own nervous system, I can control the room. I could turn it up or I could turn it down. But once I learned how to control those things, it's beneficial to me later on when I go home and try to decompress as well.
I can imagine sometimes when you're scared, you no matter how much you try to control it, your body has a way of taking that energy and allowing it to come out or manifest in some way. It could be a tick, it could be sweat, it could be your face getting red, your body could be shaking uncontrollably. You might not be able to control it. I've been in situations where I've done public speaking and I'm doing the breathing, but my hand is trembling, right? And I can imagine that some of what you were working on as far as tradecraft was to help you get control, not just over your mind, but over your body, which that could betray you, unintentionally.
Yes, everything is spot on. Great points you made. I love it because that is internally you want to implode. Internally, your body and your nervous system is just shutting down. You just want to go into a corner somewhere and just collapse, right? But you can't do that because you're live. You know, you're in the middle of an op, so you can't. So everything you just described is happening to your body. I used to be a very fast speaker. Like I'm talking fast now because your show is only so much time. But in an operation, my speech pattern slows down. The way I move is slower. I'm more controlled. And you either turn, like I said, you turn it up or you turn it off. And it's all controlled within inside of you. And then when you get home, that's that adrenaline dump I mentioned. You're controlling all these mechanisms inside your brain. You have to have all these wheels and cogs going in the brain, and you're using these different. I got to stay 10 steps ahead of you. I got to think about what you're doing. Are you here to rob me or we're just doing a deal? You know, are you trying to undermine me or, you know, do you think I'm a threat to you? You think I'm going to rob you? And then when you get home, the adrenaline dump is just finally and sometimes you don't get to make it home. Sometimes your home is your undercover apartment or your house or someplace you go and you don't have your family there. You don't have somebody to dump this on. So you just go and sit somewhere in a dark room and then you have this adrenaline dump and it's, you know, get ready and reset because it's 2:00 in the morning when you finished up. We got to be back out there at 7 a.m. So you don't have much time. So yeah, your body does take a toll. It takes a beat on you age very quickly in this career.
And, you know, you just kind of mentioned it. You're in these high pressure, high stress situations, but you have a family. You know, many undercovers, and believe you have kids, or at a certain point in your undercover work, you had kids and you had a family, and sometimes you're home, sometimes you're not. And you still want to maintain those relationships, but I can imagine it's incredibly difficult. So what is it like trying to balance your undercover work with your personal family life?
It's not easy. It's very difficult. It's one of the hardest things to do. The job is a lot easier. The job of doing undercover work, I'd rather be doing work with cartels and murderers and gangsters and mobsters than trying to balance my true home life with my wife and my kids, and because you can't control that. As matter you want to, but sometimes you just can't. It's out of control. If I'm operational, most of the times, if you're my case agent, I'll hand my phones over to you, my personal stuff, all my true identities and all that stuff in my wallet and my phones. I turn that over to you. And then when your spouse is trying to get a hold of you, or one of your kids are trying to get a hold of you, you don't have that with you, and it could be days. Now at home, they're struggling to raise kids. You're supposed to be there helping. And then where are you? You see it depicted in a lot of different movies, but it's a struggle. It truly is that work-life balance that you're never going to win that. You never figure out I have never come across an undercover that says, oh, I got that figured out. I've got the perfect work-life balance. It's impossible. So one suffers while the other one reaps the benefits. And sometimes it's your family, sometimes it's, sometimes you have the common sense to say, I'm done. I'm taking a break. I'm unplugging for a little bit. That's a responsible operative. But you don't always have that option. It's not always an option for you. And it's difficult. Your loved one is wondering where you are. Why are you not answering your phone? Again, my wife did undercover work. She was an undercover operative. And she was smart enough to leave it early in her career. But, again, even her, she understands that I'm out late hours. She understands I'm across, I might be fishing in the Pacific. I might be in San Francisco. I might be in California. I might be in Florida. I might be in New York. She doesn't know where I am. So, and she's worried about if I'm alive. She doesn't want to get a phone call from my case agent or my contact agent, because then that's the worst call you can get. Or she has to go to sleep. She's got to put the kids to bed to be up with them the next day and try to be a mom and run the household while I'm gone. It's a hard job. It's a hard job for everybody all around.
And I feel like marriages are challenging enough without that kind of extra added component. And I'll just say normal people with a normal job such as myself, you go through a certain amount of stress, but this is a whole different level, ball game, universe of stress. So I can't even imagine attempting to maintain healthy relationships, a healthy marriage, while you're constantly in this sometimes potentially life and death sort of situation where any wrong turn, you're gone.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine what you must have gone through, and what your significant others and your family must have gone through right with you.
No, looking back, when I was a seasoned undercover and a mature undercover, I would sit there and put myself in situations. I didn't infiltrate the Mafia one time. There was a bunch of times I did different cases with them, but I had been around the most violent offenders that planet has to offer. And I could be in other countries no matter where I was, and I'd say, oh my God, did I call home? Oh my God, I forgot to call home. I didn't tell them I love them. When's the last time I said that? Oh my God, when's the last time I called the kids and told them I love them? I want them to know I love them. God, not that, I thought something was going to happen, but things break bad very quickly in the underworld, very quickly. So you don't know. My relationship with you as a target can go so well, and then the whole time you have a plan that you're going to rob me. You're just trying to get me to up my game, bring enough money, and then you're just going to rip me. Rip is a robbery. So, I don't know what you're thinking. So you don't know if this is your last day. You don't know when the last time you kissed your kids or said goodbye to them or told them what they meant to you. So those things you think of, and it's like, all right, I got to get that out of my head. I got to go live. I got to become Giovanni Gatto, right? I got to become all these other guys that I used to be. So when I became that person without kids, and you have to be careful. I didn't have kids as an undercover. So for me to relate to kids, the undercover Giovanni, I didn't like kids. I love kids in my true life. I love them to death. I love other people's kids. I love being around kids. But Giovanni Gatto, he hated kids. He thought they were nothing but headaches and trouble and blah, blah, blah. So you can't show. You want to rub a kid on the head and be nice to him? Nah, get this kid out of here. You know, that's just a persona that I took on because I wanted them to think I was a gangster's gangster. You know, so yeah, you're running this tightrope, and then you're treating these kids or you're treating women. You know, you become this other persona, the persona that your mom didn't want you to be. You become everything that your mom taught you, the way you talk to women, the reasons why you would get spanked as a kid. I'm now doing as an undercover, and I got my mom's head in my, my mom's voice in my head going, "Don't speak like that. Don't treat that woman like that. I'll give you one on, with the belt." And and my mom, I always had my mom's. But again, I'd always apologize. Like if I talk down to somebody, I say, "Hey, I'm sorry. I used to use the gangsters phrases. Hey, I'm not right. I'm not all there. You got to understand. So." And you create this persona. And sometimes guys slip and they start to believe they are who they're pretending to be. You can go down a slippery slope with that too.
So tell us about your alter ego, Giovanni Gatto.
Giovanni Gatto was a guy I came up with. Well, I wasn't a guy. Again, everything I described to you, the kid I was from the neighborhood. Giovanni Gatto, in the end, Giovanni Gatto's identity, as I write about it in the book, it's great how he truly came to fruition. Because it just happened to be the identity that I was using when I infiltrated the DeCavalcante Crime Family. And when they asked me, so, it was about 2 years into the case, where one of the guys, a main guy in the family, said to me, "So, I don't get it. Where do you come from? You talk like us, you walk like us, you look like us. Where have you been your whole life? What are you talking about?" And then you just have a regular conversation. You know what I'm asking? Like, "I never met you. You're right around my age," that kind of thing. I said, "Yeah, well, I wasn't always looking like this. I grew up and I kind of made them work for it. I didn't just throw it out there, right? I didn't just vomit this legend all over them. I made them work for it and I piecemeal it out." I said, "Listen, don't worry about where I come from. Do I ask you where you come from? Don't worry about it. Here's where I come from. You want to ask who I am? Don't worry. Well, you got people around you? Yeah, I got people." And then my buddy Dutch, who I host the show with now, he'd always be my fallback, right? Here's a guy that looks like somebody I hung out with as a kid, somebody I grew up, one of my aunts were dating or something. He had the beard, he had the whole biker look. And I said, "Look, I'm with guys. If I need to burn down a city, I'll burn down a city. I got guys I can call up. They don't look like us, but they'll come with their, iron horses and they'll burn the city to the ground. If I ask them to. Don't worry about it." Oh, so you're an outlaw. I get those guys. Oh, an outlaw motorcycle group. Yeah, kind of. And that's it. And that's the legend that I had. Very much like my true life. I just drew from that. I drew from different stories of my friends' moms dying, how they died. I would draw on those stories from my true life. Again, because you can't F up you, right? You can't always do that in every case. Sometimes you got to be different. But Giovanni Gatto was a unique dude. He was, and I thought I had it all. I write about it in the book, and my book is called Giovanni's Ring because I used to take off my government pinky ring, and I got it from the Hoover building, and it was taken out of, property and evidence. It was an old school ring, and I got it for those reasons, and I had a story who gave it to me, and, uncle or handed down to me. My mom gave it to me. If anybody asked, "Why is it so old?" Or, I always had something to add to my legend. So Giovanni Gatto was somebody who was living inside of me already. I think Giovanni Gatto would have been the guy that Giovanni Rocco could have turned into hadn't he become a cop, is Giovanni Gatto. I think that's what.
I was thinking, as you were giving some of those examples, some of the evasiveness probably actually worked in your favor in terms of building your credibility with the people that you were with. Now, at a certain point, you probably had to give them answers, but the evasiveness probably worked in your favor.
Sure, because that's what a gangster does. You ask them a question, "Where you from?" "Don't worry about where I'm from. I'm just trying to have a conversation." "Oh, have another conversation. Don't worry about where I'm from." And if you're going to do that, you can't come off with that much of a chip on your shoulder. You have to do it in a way where, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to come off like that. But, you're touching on something. I don't want people asking private. I get the same thing, G. I understand what you're saying." So, yeah, you play on those. There's all these cogs and wheels going in your head, and you're trying to maintain these conversations because you don't know if you say the wrong thing to a guy, Like, I've heard stories when I was in the Mafia that they killed a guy just for sneezing at the table. The boss had a guy whacked out. And his whole thing was, the guy was sneezing down at the end, and I can't have this. I can't. What's he doing? And he's like, well, boss, he's just, I don't know, he's got allergies. I don't know why he's sneezing. And the guy kept sneezing and blowing his nose. And it just rubbed the guy the wrong way. And, he's just, I can't have it. And by the end of that dinner, he decided that they whacked the guy out that night. And that's how it happens in the mob. Like, so you're living in this world where one slip up or one thing that they perceive to be offensive, you don't get to say, well, give me a chance to explain myself. You don't always get that chance, especially not in the Mafia. If somebody makes a decision that you're no good, it just could be the way you color your hair, the way you wear your shirt, the way you think who you are, the way you carry yourself. That can get you whacked out in a New York minute.
How did Operation Charlie Horse begin?
So Operation Charlie Horse started with me on a Saturday night or a Sunday night. I was working in my garage at home, spending some time, quality time in my garage at home, my family, see what happens. Even when I'm home, I'm not home. I had a lot of that. Then, I'm out in the garage, and I had gotten a phone call from another undercover, and he asked me to come out as bona fides. And that bona fides is, he was a Greek guy, Greek by heritage. And he just said, look, G, I'm doing a dope deal. You want to come out? I could use a little bona fides. And bona fides is, I'm showing up as his friend, but anybody who's like I'm trying to think of like a character, like a Sonny from The Godfather, right? Sonny Corleone, who has a hair trigger temper. You don't know what kind of guy he is. A Christopher Moltisanti kind of guy that Michael Imperioli played in The Sopranos. Hair trigger, you don't know. And I don't know who I have to be going in. So I have to be careful how I do this dance. In that particular night, he wanted me to come as bona fides as a New York guy, a Jersey guy. And I said, okay. Because again, people say I have some sort of an accent. I talk with my hands. I often say I don't hear it, but I guess if you tell me I have it, I have it. So when I show up, the minute you hear it, you think I'm connected in some way, shape, or form. I didn't tell you I was. You just assume it was. Now I could turn that up to 10, or I could turn it down to 2. So that particular night I showed up, and I went inside the garage, from my garage into my house, and I told my wife, hey, so-and-so needs me down in Atlantic City. I'm going to shoot down there real quick. What are you talking about? It's like a 2.5 hour, 3 hour drive down to AC. Yeah, I'm going to shoot down real quick, just a dinner, do a quick drug deal, and I'm going to come right home. I'll be back. And that night, she was on call. She was working sex crimes. And she said, look, at midnight, I start my own call for sex crimes. So you better be here by midnight. You have to be home. So it was truly like Cinderella turning, that whole Cinderella, right? Where you pumpkin, you turn into a pumpkin. And by the time I get down to AC, I got my wife's voice in my head going, don't be late, don't be late, don't be late. The guys are running late. We were supposed to meet like 2 or 3 guys. And they, of course, ran very late because that's what criminals do. I don't think criminals really go by their watches. They don't set times. So they just show up when they want. And time went by and by and by. And the more time that went by, I was becoming angry, truly angry in my true self. And by the time they showed up, I was just belligerent. I was just, standoffish. But I was still in my role. Seeing my co-agent, we know how to read each other. It's almost like being in theater. You can tell where you're going with, or if you're an actor, that we definitely draw off each other. And I can draw off of him if I'm going a little too overboard and I need to draw it back a little bit. I know I should. But that night I ran with it. So the way I ran with it, I was pretty nasty to the guys. I was standoffish. We waited there for a long time. And I write about the story in my book. It's a great story, but I kind of just crapped all over the guys. And we got the dope, and it was no problem. And it was supposed to be a quick hit. A 1-2, maybe, 1 or 2 deals. And this guy, he was already a shooter. He was already a street criminal, a career criminal. So we were just going to, what they call trigger lock him, get a couple of charges on him, and he'd go away for a pretty long time. Easy case for the Bureau. And what turned into 1 or 2 drug deals turned into a almost 3-year investigation, because after that night, he went back to the town of Elizabeth, New Jersey, the city of Elizabeth, where he's from, with a stronghold. He wound up being a DeCavalcante associate. He went back there, starts bragging to everybody in the neighborhood. Oh, I just had dinner with a bunch of Bruno Scarfo guys, which is the crime family out of Philly. he made up this whole crazy story. Yeah, I met these two guys from the Bruno Scarfo family. They this, they that, they did this, they did that. Yeah, I'm doing business with them. I'm in with them now. And now it kind of elevated himself in the neighborhood where he was known as just a low-hanging fruit in the family. And he really had no street respect. He had street credibility with the young guys in the street, like the street gangs, the Bloods and the Crips and those guys, but not within the organized crime group of the DeCavalcantes. And that turned into me doing some deals with him. And then eventually what happened was he wanted to, I met a guy, Luigi Oliveri. Luigi Oliveri was a soon-to-be made guy inside the family. We didn't know it at the time. And then there was this whole crazy relationship that started in the crime family where when I met Luigi, he was more polished. He was more on time. You could set a watch to this guy. He was very, he was taught to be a gangster's gangster. He carried himself well. He was a man of his word. And I hit it off with him. So what I thought was going to be a case against Luigi Oliveri, now the kid Jimmy that I met down in Atlantic City, he got jealous. He tried to trump him. He drew his card, and his card happened to be his uncle Charlie Stango, who was recently released. He just got released for murder. He did, I think, 15 years for a homicide and a conspiracy to commit murders. He was on a run for a while before they caught him. He was getting out of prison. And then I met him a couple of months later, and it just took a life of its own for the next, 3 years, almost 3 years of my life.
And by this point, you were in the FBI. You had made the transition from police to FBI.
Yeah, I was always police. I was a TFO, a task force agent, and then I was DEA in my younger years in my career. But yeah, I worked DEA task force for a long, long time, and then I took a break for undercover worked major case. And then the FBI came calling, and they asked me if I wanted to be on a task force. I joined a task force with the FBI. They gave me the chance to become a full-time undercover for the FBI, what they call an undercover employee. And I was with the Bureau until the remainder of my career.
Okay. So you meet Charlie Stango. What's he like?
Loaded
question.
It's hard to describe Charlie. So Charlie is everything I grew up in the neighborhood knowing. Like the guys that I grew up in, the hair trigger tempers, that was what I was exposed to first, right off the bat. I met him in a diner. They called me to him. I got called for, as they say in that world. When you get called for, you don't say no. I'm not a member of the family. I'm just some low-hanging fruit associate of his nephew. And I got called to a meeting. And he was a pretty smart guy. He actually had the Gambinos vet me out first. Because again, he was recently released. When I tell you, like, when I came into this case, he was just being released on parole. So he was on parole. And just to show you, he's a career criminal, and he is committed to Cosa Nostra life, so much so that he didn't skip a beat. The minute he was out of prison, the day probably he was out of prison, he was probably on the phone with all the guys in the family trying to set things up again for himself. He came out of prison as a soldier, and he got bumped up to a Capo regime. And a captain in the family is higher than a soldier, higher than a made guy. A captain starts running his own crew. So Charlie had the status. They gave him the status because I guess he kept his mouth shut when he did his time, and he never said anything. He never flipped. So yes, he was in all 5 families, Charlie Stango is a known guy. He's feared. He is, the Bureau had a long history on him. They had open cases, what they thought he might have been involved in. So there was that hunger to solve those cases. There was some thoughts he might have some information on cases in the past throughout the 70s and 80s. And then there was just the fact that what bodies are laying there that he might have done. So there was a big interest into him. But we never thought in a million years we would penetrate him. There's nobody ever said, hey, let's target Charlie Stango. This thing just happened and manifested on its own. And it was because of my relationships with these guys and the way that I ingratiated myself in. Some of it was a little bit of luck, and some of it was I knew how to walk like them, talk like them. I knew how to, not always. I never portrayed myself as a gangster. I came in as a street guy. I had a lot of things going on. I had some things going on the street, some hijacking stuff, and I had some counterfeit goods I was selling in the street, mainly a lot of cigarettes, which was good, and some other counterfeit goods, things that I had done previously in other cases. So I brought those things to these guys, and they bit. In that world, that's everything, right? If you can make $1 Well, for a few bucks, you're making some money in the street. You're not making millions, but guys are making good scores off of my stuff. Again, Luigi wanted to know me, Jimmy wanted to know me, and then Charlie wanted.
Do you feel like, looking back on it, they did the correct amount of due diligence on you?
They did. So I prepared for the role. I don't talk about it a lot, Jacob. I don't think I've really heard it in my interviews. I was so fearful going into this that I would mess up because, again, being around these mob guys and having an understanding of them, it wasn't my first infiltration to Mafia, but I had never done it on my own. I had done it with other agents, and we did some stuff in Italy. We did some things here in the States. So it wasn't my first rodeo with these guys. It wasn't my first May guy in the States either. I helped infiltrate the Gambinos in another case. But I wanted to make sure as I started to go down this rabbit hole with this thing and realized, oh my God, I got to live around these guys every single day. I wanted to make sure. So what we had done was the Bureau came up with an idea. We used sources, and some sources brought me out in the street, and they just brought me to meetings and put me around me guys and other families and just introduced me. Cup of coffee. Hey, I'll meet you at the diner. This is my friend Giovanni. He's not with anybody, but he's around, just kind of, and they wanted to see, I really wanted to see how I could survive around these guys, So just to prepare for the role, I wanted to make sure, because going into this, again, I wasn't afraid they would find out I was an undercover FBI, but they would find out or think that I was a rat. And that's the worst thing to be looked at as a rat, as an informant. You'll get killed.
So how does the operation progress?
So it progressed based on the money, right? I'm making money in the street. Jimmy made pretty good money on the street. I gave Jimmy some stuff. Me and another undercover, we gave him some swag, some stolen stuff, what he perceived was stolen stuff. He was selling it in the street. Timberland boots, knockoff stuff, some Fendi purses, Coach bags, and stuff like that. So when he showed up in the neighborhood, it piqued a lot of interest. Where are you getting these things? I'm getting it from a guy from down south, I'm getting it from this guy, Giovanni. And the next thing you know, Louis came calling, and he wanted to meet me. And then they set up a meeting, and I met Luigi. When I met Luigi, he was like, so how much of this stuff you got? Don't worry about it. How much you want to buy? I got enough where you just tell me what you want to buy as I'm getting it. So he was buying, let's say, 3 or 4 cases of cigarettes off me. That's a pretty good score on the street, right? I was giving him a pretty good price for cases of cigarettes, not cartons. And then I would sell him some boots, and I'd sell him some swag, and he would sell it in the street. So he was pretty much turning and burning and then coming back to me right away. Next thing you know, somebody else gets wind of what Louis doing, and then they want to know. And then again, I started doing business with Louis. I kind of put Jimmy on the back burner and said, the Bureau kind of put him on the back burner and said, look, keep dealing with this guy, Luigi. We have some intel on him. He's connected to the family. And now it started becoming an organized crime. So, again, like I said earlier, Jimmy wanted to trump Louis. So he introduced to me the fact that, well, listen, my uncle is a captain. We can be vouched for, and my uncle will let me sell this stuff in the street. And Louis can't say a word about it. He's not a made guy. He has no beef. So he can't say anything. Well, whatever. I don't care who I'm doing. However I'm making money, as long as I'm selling it, I don't care who I'm selling it to. So that's how I wound up with Charlie. And again, it was all the bona fides of just the stuff I had and the stuff that I had available. So Charlie was very cautious in the beginning with me, Jacob. He was smart in the way that he wouldn't deal with me or talk to me about anything. He just met me in a diner one day. Nice to meet you, Mr. Gatto. Maybe I'll see you again. Maybe I'll never see you again. And then he would tell I found out much later, over time when he trusted me and became a confidant in me, he would say to me, yeah, I was, that was me putting you with everybody. I had the guys doing due diligence on me. Due diligence? Who did due diligence on me? Yeah, I had these guys look at you, vet you out. I went to my Borgatas in this Borgata. A Borgata is a crime family or a family. I went to Borgata with the Gambinos. That's why I had them meet you, and I had them doing business with you. And, I was looking into what you're doing with Luigi. Luigi's not getting pinched. So you seem to be okay. You've been with him for over a year, doing stuff with him. So, but in the beginning, he really made me work for it. So, yeah, it took me a while.
Now, when you're an undercover, is there ever a line that in order to maintain your credibility, you have to do something
illegal, where it's acceptable?
Yeah, it depends on the case. Again, as an FBI undercover, I was trained to work spy cases, as a city kid. And a kid growing up in Bayonne, New Jersey, if you asked me if I had top secret clearance to be working, counterintelligence cases, not in a million years would I ever think that was going to come to fruition. But it depends on what you're doing. It depends on the case. Yeah, you can't create violence. You can't traffic human beings. You can be part of it, but you're given criminal authority is what they call it. In the Attorney General's office and in the U.S. Attorney's office, they determine, the DOJ will determine how much criminal authority you're given, and then they give a certain amount, and you're authorized to commit those crimes. I can't commit crimes against people, violent crimes. I can't commit assaults or anything like that, but you can commit crimes that they authorize. So again, selling stuff in the street, that was easy. Selling swag, selling, you don't want to put dope out in the street. We don't, as undercovers or as the government, we don't sell dope. It's like kind of like that ATF, what was it, Fast and Furious. We don't sell guns, we don't put guns out in the street. We don't put dope out in the street. So that's a no-no.
And at a certain point, I'm sure you faced, in this case, dangerous situations or a dangerous dynamic because you had Jimmy and Luigi kind of at odds with each other, probably to some degree. And was there ever a time where you were nearly caught, or where you were like, this is kind of a tight situation?
Yeah, I was several. But again, throughout my career, I had a lot of situations like that. Again, I didn't have a lot of training in the beginning of my career, so there were a lot of screw-ups. I've been sewn back together. I've been stabbed on the job. I've had my eyelid ripped off. I've had my, knee replaced. I've had my shoulders. I've been like Frankenstein on this job. So I've had enough violence where I know it's time to pump the brakes. But I wasn't afraid they would beat me up. It was the fear, like I said, the fear of being looked at as a rat. And Luigi said to me one day in his social club, I was delivering stuff for him. And he says, I was with another undercover who was driving me around and helping me deliver stuff that day. And he goes, you guys are new around here. And you especially, G, and I'm just letting you know, we know we're being looked at. There's a leak, right? In law enforcement. And law enforcement told us they're looking at. We got a leak and we got informants inside the law enforcement. And they told us that the bulls are trying to look at us. And they're taking a shot at us. We don't know how, but, you're kind of new. And I don't know whether he was testing me or what he was doing. And that was kind of confrontational. And he goes, you know what I mean? I said, no, I don't know what you mean. And I'm in his house, so you had to be real careful. I said, no, I don't know what you mean. Why don't you explain what you mean? Because I really don't like what you're kind of implying. So why don't you explain yourself a little more? And I kind of sat up, and he was making me an espresso. And I wasn't threatening him, but I was just like, so why don't you explain? And he just brushed it off. He touched on it and moved on and told me that there was a law enforcement leak. So I was kind of a little suspicious of that. But yeah, throughout the case, almost 3 years of my life, I had a lot of screw-ups. I'll never forget, somehow one of my devices weren't working and I couldn't see. I was getting older and I had reading glasses, but I'm not going to wear my readers because I'm too vain for that, in my true life. So I really probably should have just put the readers on so I could plug these two little wires in to start my recording device. And I became so complacent, right? Complacent. Thank you. That I pulled over in a gas station. I got lazy. It was late at night. Nobody was around. It was a dark gas station in New Jersey. It was about 3 to 5 miles away from the office that I had that Charlie put me with in this construction site. And it was my office, and I was going there to buy some dope, and the guy was delivering the dope to me that night. And by this time in the case, Charlie Stango had his son reporting to me. So I was running my own crew for Charlie at this point. And I kind of did I got a little complacent where I just turned the overhead light on in my Cadillac Escalade, and I can't see these two wires. And, I pulled the wire up a little more to give me some slack, and I can't see. And as I'm holding it up here, my door on my passenger side rips open, and it was Charlie's son, Anthony. And he had his Yankee hat on backwards and a black jacket, and he just screams, "Give me all your money." And I was just, I took the wire.
Oh, my God.
And what I did was I just shoved it under the seat. And I shoved it like right under the seat in front of me. And he goes, whoa, 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 gee, it's me. Don't shoot, don't shoot. He thought I was pulling out a gun. So, I let him believe it. I said, what are you doing? I almost shot you. He goes, I was driving behind you. I've been on the Garden State Parkway for like 10 exits behind you. I got the girls in the car. We had some strippers in the car that were working for us. And he says, I had the girls in the car, and I told them that's my cousine in front of us, and we were behind you the whole time, And I followed you to the gas station. What are you doing? I said, nothing. What, are you stupid? I pulled over to make a phone call. I almost shot you. We laughed about it, and I drove on. I had to go. And his tone had changed. And he says, all right, well, I'll meet you at the office, right? And now I got in my own head, right? And I started playing psychological games with myself. Oh, my God, he had to have seen. How could he have missed this? He saw the wire. He's just not telling me he saw it. He's going to set me up at the office. And I had gotten into my own head that, yeah, he's going to do me. He's waiting for Johnny Balls, the guy that was selling me the dope. He's waiting for Johnny Balls. He's going to get it. I had this whole scenario in my head now playing out. And I was like, man, I should just leave. I should just turn around and say I had car trouble, come back another day, live to fight another day. Nah, let's just keep going, And I went there, and thank God it was, I got myself all hyped up. And just by the grace of God, the way he ran up to the truck, that was one incident. I had several of them during that case. Another guy, I was with 19 made guys in Las Vegas, and they were all there from the East Coast, New York and New Jersey. And the one guy just, as soon as I met him, and there were a case in the early 2000s when all those guys in New York got arrested. Those 200 plus guys got arrested in that RICO case. I collared up some of the guys during that case because the Bureau had to use all the guys they had. So I was processing some of the guys, fingerprinting them. And I wasn't doing a lot of undercover work then, so it was no big deal. But here this guy walks in, and he was one of those 200. And he just starts snapping his finger, pointing in my face. I know you. Where do I know you from? And I go, oh, my God, you know me from the processing room, when we locked you up at the federal building. And I said, I don't know. Where do you know me from? I know you from somewhere. So it turned out he was just drunk. He mistook me for somebody else. But it was 2 days of stress where he kept saying, so I know you. Where do I know you from? He made up this whole story. He was drunk. He's in his 70s. He's drunk and all coked up. And he told everybody the next day, yeah, I know Giovanni's father. And Charlie got in the car with me. He says, hey, I didn't know he knew your father. So what are you talking about? I don't even know my old man. My old man left me before he came home from Vietnam. My father's a dope fiend. He's probably dead by now. Charlie, how does he even know who my father is? He goes, oh, well, he said he did time with your old man. And she's making up lies. She's making up stories. So that's all it was. The guy was just drunk and made up these crazy stories. But again, you don't know, So, yeah, there's been a lot of times.
At a certain point, they might be more inclined to believe the story because they don't know. They don't know you're new. As I think it was Luigi said, you're a new guy. They're starting to look at us. That could go bad and sideways in about a second. Right. Can you tell really quickly the bridge story? That's a good one.
Oh, yeah, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, again, running late. I happened to be in the area, and I wasn't so operationally busy. And my wife had asked me to pick the kids up from a daycare. So I picked my little guy up, and he was at the daycare, and I'm driving, and I'm cutting through Staten Island, and he's in the back seat of my car. But again, here I got lazy, and I kind of let my guard down, thinking, well, you know what? I'm in a pickup truck. I'm in a black pickup. They always see me in an Escalade, and nobody's going to think too, So I grabbed my little guy, and we're cutting through Staten Island as fast as I could. And as we're on the Gothel's Bridge, just coming over the Gothel's Bridge, and we're almost mid-span on the bridge. And again, it's rush hour traffic. So you can imagine it's bumper to bumper. The bridge is not that many lanes. It's a very narrow bridge. It's under construction. So it's always one lane closed and bottlenecked. So I slow down. And Jimmy, Charlie's nephew, early in the case, he calls me up and he says, hey, Cougine. And he goes, Couge, yeah, gee, you there? I said, yeah, what's up? He goes, hey, where are you? And again, he knew me to be an Atlantic City or a New York City guy. I was making a transition between the two. And he goes, where are you? Are you up in New Jersey, New York? No, what are you talking about? He goes, where are you right now? I said, Jimmy, don't worry about where I am. What do you want? what's up? What do you need? And he goes, I'm on the Gatto's bridge. I'm on a Gatto, and I saw where he's going right away. I'm on a Gatto's bridge. There's a guy in the bridge. Are you in a black pickup truck right now? That's what you talking about. He goes, you in a black pickup on a Gatto's bridge? Why would I be in a black pickup? Why would I be in a Gatto's bridge? No, I'm not on a Gatto's bridge. He goes, bro, there's a guy, cuz there's a guy that looks just like you. I gotta catch up to this guy. Let me catch up to him. I want to take a picture of him. Looks just like you. So now here I am. I'm trying to look behind me without looking behind me. I can't move my head because he's going to see me moving. My little guy is sitting in his car seat, napping in the back. Thank God, because that's why I took the call. He was sleeping. You know, I wouldn't have took the call if he was awake. And yeah, and I just fought through traffic, dodging, and I got around traffic as fast as I could. He goes, I can't catch up to him, but I'm going to get him, cuz I'm going to send you a picture of this guy. Looks just like you. Man, I thought it was you. And I tell you what, Jacob, that traffic, God was looking down on me many a times, and this was one of them, because as I got down the on-ramp, the off-ramp for the bridge, I just jetted as fast as I could, and thank God the traffic just opened up, and it was like Moses opening up the part in the Red Sea, because, man, that opened up, and I hit it, and I gunned it, and I got out of there as fast as I could, and I got out of there, and I was like, never again. So it was one of those things where I came home and told my wife, and, of course, she's like, oh, so now you're just going to try to get out of picking the kids up now? You're going to use it as an excuse. And then ultimately, the worst one I write about in the book was the soccer game. You know, Gambino guy walked up on me at my daughter's soccer game in New Jersey. I didn't have kids. The mobsters didn't think I lived in New Jersey. They didn't think I should be in New Jersey. And, you know, and I knew his daughter. I met his daughter a bunch of different times and, you know, knew her by name. And, you know, next thing you know, here he was walking up to me on now, I'll leave that as a little bit of a teaser. You can read it in the book, but he walked right up on me at the soccer game. Yeah, it could have been really bad. And that changed my life throughout the rest of the case, because I really couldn't go home after that.
And if you've watched the Inside the Life podcast, you'll have heard that story. Listening to it was like heart pumping, getting stressed out just listening to it. I can't imagine living it. How did Operation Charlie Horse ultimately end? So
for the Bureau, it ended successfully. And for me too, as an undercover, and as a case agent also, it ended well for me. Successful. The infiltration was successful. So successful that my relationship with Charlie grew to that of a father and son. And then eventually a war started inside the family. The boss of the family was stepping down. He was going to pass the torch for a new up-and-coming boss to come in. The boss of bosses. And I had gone on record. Charlie went on record with the bosses with me. I met the administration. He made it known who I was, made it known I'm an up-and-comer, and I speak for him now. So you can only imagine, I think I was doing meetings with 4 out of the 5 families on behalf of Charlie and just delivering messages, and I was Charlie's voice in the street. And then, so that in itself, Charlie opened up the world of organized crime and Cosa Nostra to me. And it's not just a criminal case that the Operation Charlie Horse was. Looking back on it, it's the intelligence that we gathered. Very much so that it showed the inner workings of the families and how the families worked together and how much they were so closely knit, how much they communicated together, how much they earned together. They did run themselves as as one organization sometimes. You know, they were different, but they were all one. So it was great. But that war inside the family, Luigi Oliveri kind of overstepped his bounds. He got made. There's a whole story behind that a lot of guys didn't acknowledge the way he had gotten made was not with the old ways. So a lot of guys didn't want to acknowledge him. So he had a bit of a chip on his shoulder, got himself into a predicament where they were going to whack him out. And then Charlie over dinner one night said to me, he shared with me, they're going to kill Luigi and another guy at the time. And then I was like, I can't believe you're going to kill somebody that you know your whole life. Like, you know, he grew up in this. He just got made. And he goes, no, that's it. And I told him, you'll do it. You'll kill him. So I was given a contract for Luigi. Originally it was 2 guys. They took 1 back. And then I had the contract to kill Louis. And then towards the end of the case, it was known. I challenged Charlie and said, hey, you know, if I do this, man, I'm an outsider. Like, you know, that kind of thing. I know, you know, you're like a dad to me and I'll do anything you tell me to do. But, this leaves me in a bad way. They're all going to know, and it was me. There's no guessing who it is. They're all going to know it's me. And then he explained to me there'll be 50 deep waiting to pin chip medals on your chest. Don't worry about it. And then he explained to me at the end, they were going to open the books again, and then he was going to possibly be upped again from a captain to possibly a street boss or an underboss. And if that happened, then they would open the books and make me. But because of the murder and the plan of the murder, it just got too hairy towards the end, Jacob, where it was either I had to kill him or Charlie was going to get on a plane and fly from Henderson, Nevada over to Jersey, and he was going to whack him himself. And we couldn't take that chance, so the case had come down after all the evidence was gathered. And, we got all the bosses on the wires and the crew and all the guys tied up in the case, and that was the end of it. And subsequently, I retired. I was forced to retire and relocate my family out of it. My law enforcement career ended.
If you don't mind me asking, was the boss at that time Charlie Big Ears Majuri, or was it somebody else?
Charlie's Big Ear Majuri was the one. He was transitioning to be the boss. He ultimately became the boss, but during my time of infiltration, John Riggy was the boss, John Eagle Riggy. And then what happened was, because Big Ears was going to take it with Joe Merlo being his underboss, they were the acting guys for the time being. And it pretty much everybody knew it was going to go that way. But one half of the family was right down the middle. Some guys didn't want Big Ears to have it, and they didn't want Joe Merlo to have it either. So, it caused a lot of disdain. But ultimately, they did get it, and that's who I went on record with.
And your story was, and I want to get to the retirement part because was unexpected that you would be kind of forced into retirement. I did not expect to hear that when I heard your story for the first time. But your story is very similar to that of Joe Pistone, and he got the contract, and that's when he was quickly exited out of the operation. You got the contract. That's when you were exited out of the operation. But one question I always wanted to ask was there ever a realistic scenario where you were given the contract and they snatched Luigi and faked it? Is that even a realistic possibility as an undercover to kind of keep it going and eventually get you made into the family?
Yeah, we've done that in the past. We've done that in our cases in the past where we've done that exact thing. Flipped the guy. He or she understood that we saved their life. They were going to get whacked out, and they're very grateful to us. So they look to cooperate with us, and anything they can do to help at that point. Luigi was a different breed. Luigi lived and breathed. This is what he wanted his whole life. This was in his DNA, and I don't think there was a scenario where we even thought he was approachable and flippable. He was just in the life. That's the life he lived. And I think everybody was in agreement that it's just no way, it's not going to happen. And just too many moving parts. The war inside the family, the way certain Luigi's crew was coming for our crew towards the end. My guys, I couldn't control my guys and my crew anymore because they were out of control. So it was all these different moving parts where it was just better to take it down, I think, and just be done with it. And it's not to say blame. Blame is the wrong word. Operationally, we did our job. There comes a point where all I do is I put this nice little package together, case agents, the team does, our investigative team, not just the undercovers, because it's not just me doing this work, right? It's a whole team, including my supervisor, Anthony Zamponia. He decides, okay, this is what we're doing. But eventually, we take all of our evidence that we collect and we hand it over to a U.S. Attorney's Office. The U.S. Attorney's Office, they're the ones who determine whether 10, 50, or 200 guys are going to be arrested, right? Depends on what kind of splash they can make at the time. Depends on how many caseloads we have. Depends on what's going on in the Bureau at the time. We did our job. We passed it off to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they determine arrests from there. I think they could have made better decisions. They could have done something like you said. We could have done these different things, but in today's world with electronics and, different things, Luigi's counter surveillance on me a bunch of times, the things that happened. He actually followed my surveillance team back to the FBI building one day, and I didn't know it, and they didn't tell me for the longest time. I found out in the street when I was confronted in the street. So my surveillance team, it was an oops, right? Oops, we forgot to tell Jim. Well, don't you think it's important that you tell me you got followed back to the Bureau? You know, that Luigi actually in a vehicle followed you back, and I got called out in the street for that. And that's when they threatened to chop me up into pieces, you know.
Wow.
So there was all these different moving parts. So yeah, at the end, it was just better that, and I'm glad they did it that way. You know, could have been done 1,000 different ways. That is, we've done it that way in the past where Luigi comes on board, we stage it. Jay Dobbins did a great job with that with the Hells Angels, and, you know, they used a friendly to do that, and just different things that could have been done. But every case ends differently, and this is how mine ended.
And did you ever? So I'm assuming Charlie Stango gets arrested and sent to prison along with others. Were you ever having to step into the courtroom and testify, or did that just get passed on to the legal people, the prosecutors?
So we were prepared for that, right? That aha moment that we've had in the past. So I flew out to Vegas when the takedown. Charlie was living in Henderson, Nevada. A lot of my guys that were in our crew, they lived back on the East Coast. So they thought it best for me when a takedown happened, I should be out in Las Vegas for the purpose of if they try to flip Charlie or they try to get him to come on board to help find some bodies in the past, that the family or anything he might know of, that aha moment when they might need me to walk in a room and say, yeah, listen, this is who I am. But that never happened. He knew right away who I was. They leaked it out right away. They kind of told him right away. It was in the affidavit that he'd been infiltrated by an undercover for so many years. A lot of guys showed up for their first appearance, like the hardcore guys, the older guys. They told the judge during first appearance, we're done. Just, Your Honor, just stick me in a can. Let me start getting time. Let me start getting my credit for my time. Because when they realized it was me, you're talking, 3 years of tapes. Every conversation's on tape, video, audio. I mean, we just didn't go around sporadically record. We recorded everything. So what are you going to do? You're going to try to call yourself a liar and the things you said on tape? These guys knew they were fried. They were fried. So at first appearance, they were just asking, stick me in a can. Let me start serving my time. A lot of guys looked out for me. A lot of guys in the crew had told their wives or their girlfriends, the arresting agents heard them saying, hey, call G, tell her to run. They were still looking out for me even after the arrest. It's crazy.
I think that speaks to how effective you were. And I'm going to assume that at some point you developed real personal feelings for some of these people. And it just speaks to the job that you did.
Yeah, I did. I had relationships with a lot of different guys. But I always knew who they were, the criminals. But it's their families that I was invited into their homes and the closeness that I knew growing up in that environment in Bayonne. That's why it's so important to talk about my childhood, because that's what I identified. As I identified with these guys growing up, a lot of that was scarring to me later on.
So after the case, you were forced to retire. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I think eventually you went into taking your experiences and using that for training and development for police, military, intelligence units.
Yeah, it took me a long time to get there. Again, I sat on the beach, as they say, right? I sat in my backyard. They had the Bureau and the DOJ had to figure out how to get me out. They treated my family well. A lot of people say, well, they didn't really treat you well because it ruined your career. Well, listen, I could have raised my hand and said, I back out of this case right now. This is too close to home. But it was I don't know. It's not that I was the guy that could be the only one that did this. But again, going back to it, I walk like them. I talk like them. There was a lot of things that just checked the box, and my understanding of them and being able to swim in those waters was everything, So when they all had been arrested, that was it. It was like, all right, you can't come back to the building now. You can't come back to the division. But try to lay low. Go put your family together. They sent, at the time, Director Comey was our FBI director. They sent his personal security team down, the guys that had headed off his security team. They treated us well in that aspect. They did a threat assessment. You can only imagine I failed horribly. I lived in New Jersey. I lived amongst these guys. My family lived amongst them. And the threat of retaliation was there. So we just couldn't take that chance. But for 9 months, I sat around because the Bureau and DOJ had to fight over where they were going to get the funds to relocate a cop. See, I'm not an FBI agent. See, what they did with guys in the past, like Jack and other undercovers that they had to relocate, or if they did, they're agents. They can move them to another field office. With me, I'm a Jersey cop. You know, I have to I have to work in this PD until I retire. You know, I might be on loan to the federal government, but I'm still owned by a local PD. And my PD pretty much threw their hands up. Like, look, I remember the day I sat in a conference room with the FBI, DOJ, and my chief, and he was like, look, this guy doesn't even belong to me. He's been with you guys for decades. Like, he's yours. Like, why don't you just take him and just hire him as a contractor? And they were like, no, we don't do that. So it was pretty much, you know, left some sour taste in my mouth. And I went through some mental health issues, sitting in my yard, sitting in my house, couldn't leave. They told me, well, if you have to leave, grow a big beard, grow your biker beard back again, you know, do that kind of thing. So 9 months I sat around angry, really angry. And then finally I started doing some speaking gigs for the Bureau, training gigs for the Bureau. I did that for a while, and then learning about different, you know, modalities and trainings. And then I met a guy who was doing a presentation, Dr. Tom Coglan. He's a great guy, winds up being a very good friend of mine now. He was presenting on mental health of undercovers. So I learned a lot from him. And then I started presenting on my case. And, you know, people want to hear the sexy story, the mob story, but at the same time, military and first responders, they suffer the same trauma, everything we talked about, the transference, the vicarious trauma onto families. And I look back on what I did to my family with this case and my other cases in my career, and it's all what first responders do and military guys do to their family. You know, we think that our family, yeah, listen, they're our family. But they didn't sign on for this. I put my kids through hell. I put my kids through relocating. You know, my two younger children, my two older children, they had to separate from us. My little guy and girl, they were, you know, running drills at night. You know, imagine doing evac kids with your kids. My kids didn't become FBI people and cops and law enforcement. My kids are being kids. Next thing you know, they're hyper vigilant. I got to train them to look out for any Cadillac that goes down the street or a Lincoln Town car that drives down the street. You know, meanwhile, my poor little girl is outside playing sidewalk chalk, and she sees a livery car, and she's trained to come in and tell us. And I had cameras all up on poles in my neighborhoods, and you know, looking back on it, they didn't sign off for that. You know, they didn't do that. So it took me a long time to get through it. So again, now that's what I share with military and first responders, that identifying the trauma and the stress and how to mitigate it. That's what I do a lot of speaking on now.
I can imagine there's a certain amount of post-traumatic stress, as you had talked about, maybe with your father, that just was transferred to you, and you know, through the undercover work from you to your family, and I'm sure that some of that they'll take with them as they get older. At a certain point, you started, and this is where I really discovered you. You started doing the Inside the Life show for the Mob Museum. Yeah. How did that come together?
Oh man, I'm blessed. The Mob Museum invited me.
Great, by the way.
What's that?
It's really great, by the way.
I
enjoyed it very much.
I appreciate it. You know, because you're your own worst critic, and Dutch and I are our own worst critics all the time. But I had a relationship with the museum. Actually, my first public appearance when I wrote the book and I came out, my first non-law enforcement appearance was at the museum. And I'll never forget, because again, I was living in Vegas, and I was out in Vegas a lot with Charlie, and you know, I always knew the Mob Museum was there, but I could never visit it because here I was infiltrating the mob, you know, and I probably could have just walked inside, but I never wanted to get caught, you know, touring the Mob Museum while I'm infiltrating the Mafia. And it was always something I wanted to do. So when I had been invited to do my first public appearance was there, and we just hit it off. We had a relationship, and they're so easy to work with, and they're such a great group of people, that my relationship with the president, Jonathan, had grown to be that of, he was like, well, we should do something together. And I always said, look, I believe in the mission of the museum so strongly. Anything I could do and anything they asked me to do, I would do. That's how strong I believe in what they're doing with it. You know, because they are the Museum of Organized Crime, but it's also the Museum of Law Enforcement too. So they're not glorifying and honoring gangsters. They're telling a story, and they're doing it in such a way that, and that's what I always appreciate about them. The younger generation, the outreach they do, that was the draw for me with the museum. The fact that they do the local outreach to kids, the kids that are at risk, you know, in neighborhoods, and they try to do these things where they connect with them at a young age. That was the draw for me. So anything else was just the cherry on top for me. And then we came up with the Inside the Life. They did. They actually gave me the opportunity, and there's nobody else I would co-host with, and I didn't have, the wherewithal to do it on my own. And I'm blessed that they met Dutch, my co-host, and they saw the two of us. And again, they saw the dynamic that all these criminal organizations saw with the two of us. The museum saw it, and they just decided, okay, it's going to be a show called Inside the Life with Giovanni and Dutch, and it's been an absolute honor. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. And it is, I'll just say it's the chemistry. And you had mentioned that in the field, and you had worked with Dutch in the field. So there's a certain amount of rapport that you guys have that, in my opinion, kind of jumps off screen. And I know there's a video component, of course, to the show. I'm sure it gets distributed on audio, but I always watch the video component. And you have your guests in studio, great studio. Great visual and audio quality, and I've watched every episode, every episode. So as soon as as I saw your story and I've watched all of the interviews, I was like, I'd really like to talk to Giovanni.
No, I appreciate it.
I'd really like to have him on my show.
And again, it's the stories that they bring, right? They pick the guests, and they kind of ask our input, but they really are putting it together. And yeah, there has to be a bit of a jive to it, but. There's folks like me that are operators. There might be case agents, supervisors along the way, law enforcement to tell their career. But on the other side of the coin, it's from the people that were inside the life on the criminal side. Stories of redemption, the stories of coming out of it, stories of what they experienced when they were in, from all these different genres, not just Italian organized crime. And we're trying to touch so many different genres. And then we do a little bit of the pop culture, just throw it in there for people that like. And I was curious. I was curious to hear from some of the actors we had on from the Sopranos cast. I was curious, like, Vinny Pastore. I wanted to hear, when he, and I don't want to give them pretty much, I think everybody's seen the Sopranos, but when he was wiring up against the family, yeah, he's portraying as an actor, but I wanted to feel, what did it feel as an actor and somebody that knew the life, and not that he was ever inside the life of organized crime, but he was exposed to it, and how did that make him feel? And just to hear these different stories, and Kathy Narducci being another one, and Chris Brancato was on the first season, just to hear how his creative mind works to come up with these different shows. Narcos, my dear friend Javier Payne, he was on, one of the first guests on there, and tell his story, his triumphs and tribulations with Pablo Escobar. So it's, the guests are tremendous guests.
Yeah, and it is interesting to hear. You hear both the law enforcement and the criminal side, but I also enjoy hearing the actors who in many cases have bumped up against the life, as you said, Vinny Pastore, that you can go out on Facebook or Google and you can see pictures of Vinny with real mob guys. So like there is an element of, obviously he's not in the life or anything, but there is an element of that authenticity that he brought very much to The Sopranos. And he's been in other mob movies that I think helps make it more believable. But it is interesting to hear the behind the scenes, the actor's perspective in terms of how they're trying to play a part.
Sure. And even so, the art, right? The art of being an actor and the art of portraying such a guy on screen. While The Sopranos was being filmed and it was like, being wrapped each season or each episode, they had rap parties, right? Like, or at the end of the season, they would have parties. I was doing surveillance as a case agent for organized crime, working organized crime and intel, doing surveillances or doing search warrants. And next thing you know, I'm hitting made guys' houses, doing inventory of their bedrooms and searching their houses. And you come across pictures of them, real mob guys, at the Sopranos premieres and at the Soprano rap parties. And here they are. They should not be there, but they're all made guys. And some of these guys went to these rap parties because they thought they were very authentic and they thought they were doing a good job at it. So it's just funny.
Yeah. And in the DeCavalcante family was definitely the one where it was like, is that us?
Yeah, the car, right? They had the car bug. And one guy was saying, did you watch that show Sunday night? I think it was season 1, episode 1. They're like, yeah, that's us, And here they were saying, what a great, and again, for evidence purposes, you got to look at a RICO case. That's a great tape for law enforcement to have. 2 guys riding in the car and saying, hey, you see them guys portraying the mob on TV? They're portraying us. That's us. So
that's life imitating art. Well, Giovanni, thank you so much for taking the time, taking your Labor Day and spending it with us. I really appreciate that. Where can people find you?
So I hope they never find me because I don't want you finding me.
Not
No,
literally.
Yeah, where you can find me online and stuff. Giovanni'sRing.com. For books, signed books and stuff like that. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on what is the rest of the stuff? Facebook. But more importantly, just Inside the Life. That's the access to Dutch and myself. That's the best way to follow us, is following Inside the Life. It's insidethelife.org is the website, and that'll bring you to the Apple Podcast, Spotify, and all the carriers that are either playing the shows by audio or by video. And just following us at the Mob Museum. Come and visit the Mob Museum if you're in Vegas or if you have plans to travel out there. It is truly, you will not regret it. It's an experience, and it really immerses you into the life of law enforcement and organized crime as best they can.
Yeah, it is. I've been there myself. I was there pre-COVID. They've got some amazing artifacts, the St. Valentine's Day Massacre Wall, the chair that Anastasia was shot in, and a number of other things. That's just the tip of the iceberg as far as the Mob Museum. It's definitely, if you're a mob aficionado,
we've
it's
got
worth
some great
the
new
trip.
artifacts. So new ones came in and new ones are on the way. So they keep it fresh and they keep it
Awesome.
growing. So, stay on top of it. Keep checking that website at the Mob Museum.
Awesome. Well, to everybody, I always end the episode. I'm just going to end it. Thank you, Giovanni, for coming on. But to everybody else, grazie.
Grazie, Jacob. Thank you. Appreciate you, brother.
Thank you for listening to the Gangland History Podcast. If you'd like to donate to the show, check out our Patreon channel. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit like and subscribe to help the channel grow. If you're an audio-only listener, subscribe via Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or anywhere you get your podcasts. Until next time, don't forget to keep your mouth shut.